The avoidant person who is acting distant and cold toward you, who has withdrawn or created space or become emotionally unavailable, who seems unaffected by you or by the relationship or by the possibility of losing you, is actually thinking about you constantly, obsessively, with intensity that would surprise you if you could see inside their mind, and understanding this paradox, that their external coldness masks internal preoccupation, is crucial for making sense of their confusing behavior and for protecting yourself from internalizing their distance as evidence that you don't matter or that they don't care. The counterintuitive psychological reality is that the avoidant often thinks most about the people they're most distant from, obsesses most over the relationships where they've created the most space, is most internally consumed by the very people they're externally pushing away or ignoring. This is not romantic notion about them secretly loving you while acting like they don't. This is psychological reality about how their defensive system works and about what's happening in their internal experience, even when their external behavior suggests indifference or lack of caring. When the avoidant is acting distant and cold, when they've withdrawn or ended things or created space, they're simultaneously engaged in constant internal dialogue about you, replaying conversations and interactions, analyzing your behavior and your responses, wondering what you're thinking and feeling, imagining scenarios of reconnection or of permanent loss, comparing current distance to memories of closeness, questioning their own choices and patterns, defending those choices internally while also feeling guilt and regret, monitoring your life through whatever information they can access, thinking about reaching out and then talking themselves out of it repeatedly, experiencing emotional turmoil that their composed exterior completely disguises. This nonstop thinking is happening specifically because they've created distance, not in spite of it. The distance creates psychological space where obsessive thinking flourishes, where they can think about you constantly without having to deal with the actual vulnerability and intimacy that being close to you would require, where they can long for you and miss you and want you without having to face the discomfort that your actual presence creates. The proof that they're thinking about you nonstop exists in observable behaviors and patterns that reveal their internal preoccupation, even when they're maintaining external distance. They monitor your social media obsessively, even though they're not engaging with you directly. They ask mutual friends about you while maintaining no contact with you. They keep mementos or photos or messages that someone genuinely indifferent would delete. They reach out with breadcrumbs, just often enough to prove they're thinking about you, even while maintaining overall distance. They react emotionally when they see you or hear about you in ways that reveal you still affect them despite their cold demeanor. They make choices that keep them aware of your life and your status, even while they're maintaining separation. Why distance and cold behavior actually signal intense preoccupation? The avoidant person's distance and cold behavior, rather than indicating lack of caring or lack of thinking about you, actually signal intense internal preoccupation that they're managing through external withdrawal. Understanding why their coldness correlates with obsessive thinking reveals the psychological mechanism at work and helps decode their confusing behavior. Distance and cold behavior signal intense preoccupation because the avoidant creates external distance precisely when their internal feelings become too intense or threatening to manage while in proximity to you. The avoidant experiences emotional intensity about you, desire, attachment, fear of loss, vulnerability, need, and this intensity feels overwhelming and dangerous to their defended system. When feelings become too intense, when attachment feels too strong, when they care too much, the avoidant responds by creating external distance that allows them to manage these internal feelings without having to face the vulnerability that staying close would require. The distance is attempt to regulate intensity that's already present, not evidence that intensity doesn't exist. They're thinking about you constantly because the feelings are intense, and they're distant because the feelings are intense. Both responses stem from the same source of too much internal preoccupation and too much mattering. Distance and cold behavior signal. Intense preoccupation because withdrawal creates psychological space where the avoidant can think about you and long for you without having to actually be vulnerable or to risk intimacy. The avoidant wants connection, but fears vulnerability that connection requires. Creating distance solves this dilemma by allowing them to maintain internal connection, thinking about you, missing you, wanting you, without external connection that would require vulnerability. They can obsess over you in safety of their own mind without having to show you they care, without having to risk rejection, without having to be emotionally available. The distance creates safe space for their preoccupation to exist without the threat that actual proximity would create. They think about you nonstop precisely because distance allows this thinking to happen without consequences or risks that being close would entail. Distance and cold behavior signal intense preoccupation because the avoidant is internally processing the relationship, their feelings, their patterns, and the meaning of the connection, even while externally appearing to have moved on. The absence of external engagement doesn't mean absence of internal processing. The avoidant is replaying relationship moments, analyzing what happened, questioning their choices, feeling regret about their patterns, wondering about your current state, imagining different scenarios. This internal processing is constant and consuming, but it happens entirely internally because external processing, talking to you, expressing their feelings, working through things together, would require vulnerability they cannot tolerate. The cold exterior is shell protecting intense internal experience, not reflection of genuine indifference or lack of mental engagement with you and the relationship. Distance and cold behavior signal intense preoccupation because the avoidance defensive system requires them to appear unaffected even when they're deeply affected, creating contradiction between internal experience and external presentation. The avoidant cannot show that they care because showing care creates vulnerability. They cannot reveal that they're thinking about you because revelation would give you power and would create expectation of emotional engagement. They cannot demonstrate that they're affected because being affected conflicts with their defended independence and their need to appear self-sufficient. So even when they're consumed with thoughts of you, even when they're emotionally turbulent inside, they must maintain cold, distant exterior that suggests indifference. The coldness is performance required by their defensive system, not accurate representation of their internal state. The more they're actually thinking about you, the more they may need to appear cold to manage their own vulnerability and to maintain their defenses. Distance and cold behavior signal intense preoccupation because the avoidant often withdraws precisely from people who matter most, creating distance proportional to significance rather than to lack of caring. The pattern is that the avoidant can be warm and engaged with people who don't matter much, who don't penetrate their defenses, who don't trigger their attachment system. These relationships feel safe because stakes are low. But with people who truly matter, who see them deeply, who trigger genuine attachment, the avoidant must create distance because these relationships feel threatening. If they're being particularly distant and cold with you, it likely indicates you matter tremendously. You've penetrated their defenses in ways others haven't. You've triggered attachment that feels dangerous. Their distance is proportional to your significance, not to your insignificance. They think about you constantly, precisely because you matter so much, and they're distant precisely because you matter so much. Both are responses to the same underlying reality of your importance to them. Distance and cold behavior signal intense preoccupation because the effort required to maintain distance from someone you're constantly thinking about is itself evidence of the intensity of the preoccupation. If the avoidant were genuinely indifferent, if they weren't thinking about you, maintaining distance would be effortless. They simply wouldn't engage because they wouldn't be interested or affected. But the avoidant must work to maintain distance. They must resist impulses to reach out. They must actively prevent themselves from responding to you or from initiating contact. They must consciously maintain their cold demeanor when they see you. This effort proves they're fighting against desire for connection, proves they're managing constant internal pull toward you, proves they're thinking about you enough that not engaging requires active control rather than passive disinterest. Distance and cold behavior signal intense preoccupation because the avoidant experiences the distance as painful rather than as relief, thinking constantly about what they're missing and what they've lost, even while maintaining the separation. If the distance were serving them, if it were creating the freedom and relief they claim to want, they wouldn't think about you constantly. They'd be engaged with their life, focused on other things, generally unpreoccupied by you. But the avoidant experiences the distance as loss, as absence, as something painful that they notice constantly. They think about what they're not experiencing, what they're missing, what the relationship could be if they weren't so defended. This constant awareness of loss and absence proves they're preoccupied with you, that the distance isn't creating the relief or the freedom that would allow them to stop thinking about you. The specific evidence that proves you're consuming their thoughts. The avoidant person's constant thinking about you, while hidden beneath their cold and distant exterior, reveals itself through specific observable behaviors and patterns that provide proof of their internal preoccupation, even when they're maintaining external separation. Understanding these evidence markers allows you to decode their actual internal state rather than accepting their cold exterior as accurate representation of their feelings or their level of engagement with you. The evidence exists in their obsessive monitoring of your social media, checking your profiles repeatedly, even though they're not liking or commenting or engaging directly with your content. The avoidant views your stories, reads your posts, looks at your photos, checks your status, sometimes multiple times per day. They want to know what you're doing, how you're feeling, who you're with, whether you're happy or struggling, whether you've moved on or are still affected by them. This monitoring proves they're thinking about you constantly because people who aren't preoccupied don't check someone's social media obsessively. The monitoring is an attempt to stay connected to you, to maintain awareness of your life, to feed their constant thinking about you with new information. If they're viewing your content, if they're keeping tabs on your life despite maintaining distance, it's because you're consuming their thoughts and they cannot resist the pull to know about you. The evidence exists in their questions about you to mutual friends, trying to gather information about your state and your life while maintaining the appearance of not caring directly. The avoidant asks casual questions designed to elicit information. How is your name doing? Or, have you seen your name lately? Or, is your name seeing anyone? These questions reveal they're thinking about you enough that they need information. They need to know how you are, but they cannot ask you directly because that would require vulnerability and would reveal they care. The fact that they're seeking information through intermediaries proves you're occupying their mind enough that they're compelled to gather data about you, that they're thinking about you enough that not knowing feels intolerable, that their preoccupation drives information-seeking behavior even while they maintain distance from you directly. The evidence exists in their keeping mementos, photos, messages, or items that remind them of you, rather than deleting or discarding these things as someone genuinely indifferent would do. The avoidant keeps your photos in their phone, even if they've hidden them. They keep messages or emails you've sent. They keep gifts you gave them, or items that remind them of shared experiences. They maintain these physical connections because they're thinking about you constantly, and these items serve as anchors for their thoughts, as tangible connections to you, as things they can look at or touch when they're missing you. Someone who wasn't thinking about you would delete the photos, would get rid of the reminders, would clear out anything that brought you to mind. The keeping of these items proves they're maintaining mental space for you, that they're dwelling on memories and on the connection, that they're not actually moving on despite appearing to have done so. The evidence exists in their breadcrumbing behavior, reaching out periodically with minimal messages that prove they're thinking about you even while maintaining overall distance and unavailability. The avoidant sends text that says, "thinking of you," or "hope you're well," or shares something that reminds them of you, then disappears again without sustained engagement. These breadcrumbs are evidence of constant thinking about you breaking through their maintained distance. They're thinking about you until the thinking becomes so intense that they must reach out in some small way, must make some contact that relieves the pressure of their preoccupation. Then they withdraw again to maintain their defenses. The pattern of periodic breadcrumbs proves ongoing preoccupation. Someone not thinking about you wouldn't reach out at all, and someone not conflicted wouldn't reach out in such minimal, inconsistent ways. The evidence exists in their emotional reactions when they see you or hear about you, displaying affect that contradicts their claimed indifference or their distant demeanor. When the avoidant encounters you unexpectedly or hears your name mentioned, they react. They get tense or uncomfortable. They change the subject quickly. They show subtle signs of emotional activation that belie their cool exterior. If they truly weren't thinking about you, if you truly didn't affect them, these encounters would produce no reaction. The fact that seeing you or hearing about you creates visible response proves you're occupying enough of their mental space that your presence in their awareness creates emotional impact. They're thinking about you constantly internally, so external reminder of you creates reaction that they cannot completely control or hide. The evidence exists in their strategic avoidance of places or events where they know you'll be, proving they think about your location and your schedule enough to ensure they don't encounter you. The avoidant asks, mutual friends, if you'll be at events before committing to attend. They avoid places they know you frequent. They check events or situations for your likely presence and make decisions based on avoiding you. This strategic avoidance proves they think about you constantly because they need to maintain awareness of where you are and what you're doing to successfully avoid you. Someone not thinking about you wouldn't need to plan their activities around not seeing you. The effort to avoid proves the preoccupation that makes avoidance necessary for maintaining their defended distance. The evidence exists in their changed behavior patterns that coincide with creating distance from you, engaging in different activities or hanging with different people in ways that suggest they're trying to manage thoughts of you. The avoidant might suddenly become very busy, filling their time with activities and social engagements. They might date other people quickly or engage in behavior designed to distract from thoughts of you. They might change their routines or their habits. These behavioral changes are evidence of active management of preoccupation. They're thinking about you so much that they must actively distract themselves, must fill their time and mind with other things to manage the constant thoughts. If they weren't thinking about you, they wouldn't need to restructure their life to manage the thinking. The evidence exists in what mutual friends report about their state and their behavior, revealing that despite appearing fine, they're clearly struggling or affected in ways that prove internal preoccupation. Friends might mention that the avoidant brings you up in conversation, or that they seem different or off since the relationship ended, or that they're clearly not happy despite claiming to be fine. These reports from people who see behind the defended exterior provide evidence of the internal experience that contradicts the external presentation. The avoidant might maintain cold distance with you while simultaneously being visibly affected in ways that others can observe, proving that the coldness is performance rather than accurate reflection of their internal state. How their internal obsession contradicts their external withdrawal. The avoidant person experiences profound contradiction between their internal obsession with you and their external withdrawal from you, and this contradiction creates specific psychological patterns and behaviors that reveal the impossible position they're in, where what they're doing externally directly opposes what they're experiencing internally. Understanding this contradiction illuminates why their behavior is so confusing and why their distance is so painful for both of you. The internal obsession contradicts external withdrawal because the avoidant is constantly thinking about reaching out while simultaneously maintaining strict no contact or minimal contact. They compose messages they never send. They think about what they would say if they called you. They rehearse conversations in their mind. They work themselves up to contacting you and then back down at the last moment. This internal dialogue about connection happening constantly while they maintain external disconnection creates torture for them, where they're fighting against their own desires, where they want something they're preventing themselves from having. The contradiction between wanting to connect and maintaining distance is central to their experience, creating internal conflict that's invisible to you, but that consumes their mental and emotional energy. The internal obsession contradicts external withdrawal because the avoidant is simultaneously missing you intensely while acting like they're fine without you and possibly even dating others. They feel the absence of you constantly. They notice what they're not experiencing. They miss specific things about you and about the connection, but they must appear unaffected, must seem to be moving on successfully, must act like the distance is serving them. This performance of being fine while internally experiencing significant loss and longing creates exhausting split, where their external life is organized around proving they don't need you, while their internal life is organized around missing you and thinking about you constantly. The internal obsession contradicts external withdrawal because the avoidant is monitoring your life and maintaining awareness of you while simultaneously refusing to engage with you directly. They know what you're posting on social media. They know what you're doing and who you're spending time with. They maintain detailed awareness of your life, but they don't comment, don't like, don't engage, don't reach out. This contradiction of intimate knowledge of your life, combined with refusal to participate in your life, creates a bizarre situation where they're deeply involved with you in a one-sided way, where they're maintaining connection that you're not aware of, because it exists only in their observation and their thinking, rather than in actual interaction. The internal obsession contradicts external withdrawal, because the avoidant experiences intense emotional reactions to you while maintaining emotionally flat exterior that suggests they're not affected. Internally, they're experiencing full range of emotions: longing, regret, fear, desire, guilt, sadness, hope. These emotions are intense and are consuming significant mental energy, but externally, they're calm, collected, cold, distant, appearing unbothered and unmoved. This contradiction between internal emotional turbulence and external emotional flatness requires constant self-regulation and control, requires them to suppress their authentic experience in service of maintaining their defended exterior. The effort of maintaining this contradiction is exhausting, but is necessary for their defensive system to function. The internal Obsession contradicts external withdrawal because the avoidant is simultaneously idealizing you and the relationship in their thoughts while maintaining critical or dismissive stance externally if they talk about you at all. In their private thoughts, they remember the good times, they recognize what they've lost, they see your value clearly. But if they discuss you with others, or if circumstances force them to talk about the relationship, they might be critical or dismissive, focusing on incompatibilities or on reasons it didn't work. This contradiction between internal idealization and external criticism is defense mechanism that allows them to maintain their chosen distance by emphasizing negative aspects publicly while privately dwelling on positive aspects they've lost. The internal obsession contradicts external withdrawal because the avoidant wants to know everything about your current state while refusing to share anything about their own state with you. They want to know if you're happy or sad, if you're dating someone, if you miss them, if you've moved on, if you're angry or hurt. They're consumed with questions about your internal experience, but they don't share their own experience. They don't tell you they're thinking about you. They don't reveal they're affected. They don't admit they're struggling. This one-sided curiosity where they want all information about you while providing none about themselves creates asymmetric dynamic that serves their need for control and their need to maintain defended position. The internal obsession contradicts external withdrawal because the avoidant is engaging in fantasy about potential reunion or reconciliation while maintaining behavior that makes reunion impossible. They imagine scenarios where you get back together. They think about what it would be like if they could overcome their patterns. They fantasize about a different future where they're capable of showing up for you. But simultaneously, they're maintaining the distance, not doing the therapeutic work, not addressing their patterns, creating conditions that ensure the fantasy reunion cannot become reality. This contradiction between fantasy and action reveals they're more comfortable with imagined possibility than with actual vulnerability that making possibility real would require. What their constant thinking about you actually means for you. The avoidant person's nonstop thinking about you while they're acting distant and cold has specific implications for you, for how you understand their behavior, for how you protect yourself, and for what decisions you should make about your healing and your boundaries. Understanding what their preoccupation means for you ensures you're interpreting it correctly and using this information to serve your well-being rather than to create false hope or to justify accepting insufficient treatment. Their constant thinking about you means you did matter and do matter to them, validating your experience of the connection and your perception that the relationship was significant. This validation is important because the avoidance cold distance can make you question whether the connection was real, whether you imagined the significance, whether you were alone in feeling what you felt. The evidence that they're thinking about you constantly proves the connection was real on both sides, that you weren't imagining the depth or the significance, that their patterns are about their limitations, not about your value. This validation can help your healing by confirming your reality and by preventing you from internalizing their distance as evidence that you didn't matter. Their constant thinking about you means their coldness and distance are about their defensive patterns and their fear, not about you being inadequate or not special enough. Understanding that they're consumed with thoughts of you while appearing cold helps you recognize that the coldness is defense mechanism, not accurate reflection of their feelings. They're not distant because you don't matter. They're distant because you matter too much, because the intensity of caring creates vulnerability they cannot tolerate, because thinking about you constantly without the regulation of distance would overwhelm their defensive system. This understanding protects you from misinterpreting their behavior as rejection of you rather than as management of their own fears. Their constant thinking about you means you have more power and impact than their cold exterior suggests, which can be empowering recognition of your significance in their psychological landscape. You're not easily forgotten. You're not someone they can dismiss or ignore internally, even while they're maintaining external distance. You occupy space in their mind and heart that they cannot clear, even when they want to. This power and impact is validation of your importance and your significance, even though this significance isn't translating into the consistent presence and availability you deserve. Recognizing your power can be empowering as you move forward, knowing that you created profound impact even on someone defended against impact. However, their constant thinking about you doesn't mean they're capable of being with you or of providing what you need in relationship. This is critical distinction. They can think about you obsessively while lacking capacity to show up consistently. They can be preoccupied with you while being unable to tolerate the vulnerability that relationship requires. They can care deeply while being incapable of expressing that care in healthy ways. Their thinking about you is not evidence of changed capacity or of ability to be different. It's evidence of internal experience that exists alongside continued limitations. Understanding this prevents you from interpreting their preoccupation as reason to hope for reconciliation or as evidence that relationship could work. Their constant thinking about you doesn't obligate you to make yourself available to them or to accept their breadcrumbs or their inconsistent presence. Even if you know they're thinking about you constantly, even if you have evidence of their preoccupation, you're not responsible for their internal experience or for easing their discomfort about the distance they've created. They're thinking about you while choosing to maintain distance. That's their choice and their consequence to manage. You don't owe them access to you or communication with you just because you now understand they're preoccupied with you. Their internal experience is theirs to sit with, and your boundaries are yours to maintain. Their constant thinking about you means your absence and your distance are having impact, that enforcing your boundaries is affecting them even if they're not showing it externally. If you've implemented no contact, if you've moved on visibly, if you've maintained firm boundaries despite their breadcrumbing, these choices are creating impact. They're thinking about you, thinking about what they've lost, experiencing the consequences of their patterns. This impact is appropriate and is part of them learning that their patterns have costs. Knowing that your boundaries are creating impact even when they're not expressing it can help you maintain those boundaries. Knowing that your choices are having the appropriate effect of making them sit with consequences, even if they're not admitting it. Their constant thinking about you means they will likely reach out eventually, but this reach out should be met with extreme caution and shouldn't change your boundaries without evidence of genuine sustained change. Most avoidants who are obsessively thinking about someone eventually reach out. The thinking becomes too intense to manage. The impulse to connect becomes too strong to resist, or specific trigger makes them act on their preoccupation. But their reaching out from place of obsessive thinking is not same as reaching out from place of developed capacity. When they reach out, it will likely be driven by their need to relieve their preoccupation, their desire to ease their discomfort, their hope to restore some connection. It won't necessarily indicate they've done therapeutic work or developed capacity to be different. Knowing that reach out is likely helps you prepare to maintain boundaries, rather than being caught off guard and potentially lowering boundaries without appropriate protection. Their constant thinking about you ultimately means that you should use this information to understand their behavior, rather than to change your boundaries or your forward movement. Knowing they're thinking about you constantly can help you make sense of confusing behavior, can validate your perception of significance, can help you recognize that their coldness is defense rather than truth. But this understanding shouldn't change your course. You should still maintain your boundaries. You should still focus on your healing. You should still move forward with your life. You should still refuse to accept insufficient love or inconsistent presence. Their constant thinking about you is information about their internal experience, but it's not reason to wait for them, not reason to accept breadcrumbs, not reason to hope for change that may never materialize. Use the understanding to make sense of their behavior and to protect yourself from internalizing their coldness as truth about your worth. But don't use it as reason to remain available to someone who thinks about you constantly but cannot show up for you consistently. They can think about you nonstop while you move forward with your life. Their preoccupation is theirs to manage. Your healing and your happiness are yours to create, with or without their constant thinking about you, factoring into your choices and your path forward.